Yo, this is Bench Gamer here. So recently I saw this tweet questioning whether or not the manga for Genshin Impact and the info it provided about Natlan, specifically about Vanessa, was still accurate. And this is relevant to Natlan because Vanessa is supposedly from the children of Murata, which is like a long lost tribe that wandered off into Mondstadt and she was imprisoned. And then eventually she became like the hero of Mondstadt, liberating it from the tyranny of the nobles, I believe. It's been a long time since I played the Mondstadt Archon quest. I believe they referenced her and called her the hero of Mondstadt, or it was like the knight of Mondstadt. It's either one of the two. Basically, she is like a very important figure in Mondstadt history, and then she supposedly hailed from Natlan. And the reason why this is being asked is because, well, this is one of the only pieces of information we had about Natlan before actually going there. And then we actually went there, and it turned out that there's not really much to speak of when it comes to information about her. So now this person, No Redemption Arc, is asking. So there's no mention of Vanessa's tribe and Murata and her children at all in Natlan. Her and Natlan existing in one story is such a big plot hole because Natlan was one image and this comic tells completely another. And so yeah, people are basically just questioning, and this is something I've also thought about as well, because I saw a bunch of leaks about how Bennett is actually from Natlan, and then that necessarily also calls into question whether or not we're going to get information about Mondstadt, about Vanessa, about Bennett, that sort of stuff. And as far as I can tell, based on I have like 80% exploration in most of the regions in Natlan now. I've read at least maybe like half of the text that I found. I don't think there is much in the way of information on Mondstadt, to be frank, or at least directly, at least not about Vanessa and not about Bennett. So if I'm wrong, then please correct me in the comments, but that is just my impression, and that is the impression apparently for a lot of other people as well, which is why they're questioning whether or not the manga has been retconned. And one of the primary answers to this, and in my opinion probably the correct answer, is that the idea of there being a Pyro Archon called Murata is probably not a thing. Like, all of this spawns from what is essentially a mistranslation, a translation problem, where what the Chinese version of the manga said was that there was a place or a thing called Murata, or Muna, or more accurately Munata, and that Vanessa was from the people of Munata, rather than that she was actually born or descended from a Pyro Archon, or that these people were even the children of Murata. And this comes entirely from this tweet thread by Ayuka V2, and this has 17,000 likes and 2.3 thousand retweets or quotes, which probably means that it's very accurate. I'm not saying this just because I'm basing it off of the number of likes. I also understand basic Chinese, so I can go check it for myself, which I did. And it turns out a lot of things that we assume were correct in the English version of the manga probably are not based in reality. For example, one of the things that the English manga said was the Lady of Fire Murata. And I checked the Chinese version and it just said the God of Fire. Like there is no description of a female, of a gender or a female at all. They just said the God of Fire. And it's not clear whether or not Munata, which was the actual Chinese version of the name, not Murata, was either a person or a place. It's kind of unclear. This person says it's a place, and they go into more detail into it later on. But let's just look at the basic facts, right? So they say, "Hi, welcome to my thread. This thread is for all the people who are confused about why Murata isn't the current Pyro Archon," right? So this was also another confusing thing because a lot of people thought that Mawika was actually Murata and that Murata was Mawika, and they're just spelled differently. And they're actually the same person, which turns out to not be correct. So let's keep going. This thread is for all the people who are confused about why Murata isn't the current Pyro Archon, nor the former. The truth is, Murata is a mistranslation and was never mentioned in the original Chinese. Let's go over all the info we have. The idea that Murata is the Pyro Archon, God of War, stems from the official Genshin manga released back in 2018. Holy shit, it's been a long time. Was this actually released in 2018? The game came out in 2020, right? Or am I imagining things? So yeah, if this came out, I guess this was like the promotional material before Genshin Impact came out, so it makes sense why this would come out in 2018. It was probably like a slow drip feed that I was not aware of because I only started playing the game in 1.1, and I just didn't know anything about Genshin Impact before then. I basically started playing in 1.1, and it was very casually as well, so it was only around, I think, 1.2 or 1.3 where I started to get an idea of what Genshin Impact was actually all about. So let's keep going. In the prologue, Vanessa can't remember her origins, so Venti tells her about the Pyro Archon Murata and that she and her fellow people are called the Muratans. So you can see over here, right? Vanessa kind of says questioningly, Muratan, what the heck is that? And basically it's just here Venti talking about like this temper of yours is very Muratan, right? So a Muratan is kind of like a people here, right? I, a strong and proud people who dwell on the volcanic slopes of the west, the Lady of Fire, which again is never mentioned in the Chinese. I checked it myself. And I'm not sure if she mentions this, so let's just keep going. Venti also specifies that Murata is the Lady of Fire. Again, this is never in the Chinese, and the God of War. I think this part is. The God of War is part of the Chinese version. Both seem to match with what we know about Natlan and the Travail trailer. This makes it obvious that Murata is the Pyro Archon, right? Exclamation mark, exclamation mark. The CN community has never even heard of the name Murata. Again, in Chinese, the name is Munata, and then the translator just kind of assumed that Munata meant Murata because apparently the sound R doesn't exist in Chinese, so they just assumed Munata, Murata, they sound about the same. And there's another game called Honkai Impact 3rd. Some of you may have heard of it. And Murata, it's connected to Himeko, and they're like the same thing. So obviously, Himeko is red-haired, so, this person also has red hair, so they're the exact same person. It's, I think it's not an unsound deduction to make. It just turned out to be wrong, unfortunately. So let's keep going. How can this be? In the Chinese manga, the line, the children of Murata, the Lady of Fire, actually only says the children of the Lady of Fire. And I don't even think this is correct. I think they may have actually been wrong on this, but I'll go check later on again. They're still talking about the Pyro Archon, but don't mention her name at all. Why did the English translators include Murata then? That's because Venti says Muratans, Munata. And here it says, it actually doesn't say Murata people, it says Munata people. That's what it says in Chinese, Munataren. So the English translators assumed Murata is the name of the Archon, but in reality, Munata doesn't mean Murata, it means Munata. Here lies the problem. The letter R doesn't exist in Chinese, and then they basically just go around and explain why the letter doesn't explain the Chinese, and there are some like exceptions, but basically it doesn't exist in this context. Since the English R sound doesn't exist in Chinese, foreign words including R like Murata, a Japanese name, get written with a different letter instead. Murata turns into Mulata or Munata. Japanese does something similar, but instead turning L into R's. That's why the English translators assume Munata is still supposed to mean Murata, even though it reads Munata. But with a little digging and analyzing each Chinese character, you are soon to find out that Munata means something else entirely. First of all, the Honkai Impact 3rd Murata, which in Chinese actually is pronounced Wu Liang Ta. So it sounds completely different from Munata. Murata and Murata, the manga Murata and the actual Honkai Impact 3rd Murata are completely different words in Chinese, as well as completely different sounds. It sounds like Murata in Chinese is Wuliangta, and then Murata in the manga is pronounced Munata. So they use different characters entirely. The only matching character is the last one, Ta, while the rest is completely different. Every CNJP character has a meaning, and these meanings don't match. So they're just completely different words entirely. Let's analyze the word Munata, right? First of all, it was only mentioned as Munataren, so Munata people, which is what I meant by, it's not even certain if Munata is like a person or a place. This tweet thread basically claims that it is a place. I'm not so sure, but it is very ambiguous. Munataren is basically just saying people of or from Munata, which according to Chinese grammar indicates a where, not a who. From Munata, not of Munata. So even the idea, even if Munata or Murata was a person, it's not really clear whether or not these people or the children of, fire or whatever they call themselves, this lost tribe, is actually descended from the Pyro Archon. Meaning it's more likely that Munata is actually a place, not a person. Now that we've established Munata as a place, let's look at the individual characters of Munata. Here's the shocker. The last two letters, Nata, right, are the same characters for Natlan. Natlan's Chinese name is also Nata. And then there is a whole explanation for why Munata is actually just another way of saying Natlan. And you can go read the rest of this yourself. But they make a very valid case, a very strong case that, yes, this is actually just the people of Murata is actually just another way of saying people of Natlan. It's a very, very boring answer, isn't it? So let's move on. Let's go look at the actual manga now, right? It says the children of Murata here, the Lady of Fire, but in Chinese, here it says, you said God of Fire, right? So if you can read Chinese, this basically said, you said that the god of fire. It doesn't even say Lady of Fire, right? The Lady of Fire. It's not a thing. There is no Lady of Fire. And then again in Chinese here, 也是战争之神, and also the god of war. Again, there is nothing about the Lady of War. They just completely made that up. I'm sorry. This is one of the worst translation mistakes, or one of the most egregious translation, I don't know, what would you call it, assumptions that I have seen in Genshin Impact. It's like on the same level, I would say, as the galaxy or world or universe being completely interchangeable in the Honkai universe. Not Honkai universe, I'm doing the same thing again. In the Honkai franchise, I guess, there are so many different ways that they have translated universe, world, and, galaxy. All of that is completely fucked. It's completely unreadable for me. I'm sure that there is somebody out there who can make sense of it, but essentially, if you are like a Honkai franchise fan, galaxy, world, universe, planet, even planet, it's all mixed into one. And this is just another case of that, right? So the basic gist of it is that the children of Murata could just mean the children of Natlan, and this is just a lost tribe of Natlan, Natlanese people just walking around in Mondstadt. So beyond this thread was made in July 31st, 2024, right? So this tweet thread isn't privy to some of the new information that has come out recently. Beyond this, right, there is actually some lore that does indicate that there is somebody who Venti knew in the past that may or may not be equivalent to a Murata or Munata. It's not indicated in the manga that this person was necessarily named Murata or Munata, but the manga does make the case that Venti did know a person that was the Pyro Archon at some point, but this is very unlikely to be the person Mawika that we know today as the Pyro Archon. So this is a voice line by Venti. It's not recorded here, so I have to read it myself. That actually talks about or implies that they knew a previous Pyro Archon. They say this world is cruel. This world sure is cruel, forcing generation upon generation of human heroes to become cannon fodder in the fight against the darkness. But under Mawika's leadership, they achieved a truly godlike feat. And then he laughs and starts saying, starting with her, I suppose the Latvianese have always been like that. So this implies that this her is somebody else other than Mawika, but because he's not actually personally familiar with her, he says, all right, I heard Mawika likes to drink. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? So he's obviously not on personal terms with Mawika. And so this her in quotation marks is probably referencing to somebody else who maybe started the tradition of Natlanese being like this. So it is implied in the voice line that he did know a previous Pyro Archon, and it is also implied in the manga itself. But this is not necessarily related to Vanessa or the lost tribe that wandered into Natlan. And Mawika's weapon also has some small tidbits of lore about this lost tribe. For example, this part is describing Xbalanque having visions about the future. He saw the lost tribe wandering the land, their warriors still fighting for freedom. And this is probably referencing the tribe that Vanessa came from, fighting for their freedom in Mondstadt. And as far as I know, this is all the lore we have about the manga's version of Natlan. And it is still somewhat reflected here in this version of Natlan that we have today. It's just very, very small and kind of inconsequential. So that is basically it in terms of whether or not the lore has been retconned, which it probably has not. I don't think the things that we learned about Natlan in the manga are untrue anymore. It's just that it's basically like a game of telephone. And the Chinese version says one thing, and then the Japanese version says another thing, and then probably the English translator looked at the Japanese version and was like, okay, maybe they're saying Murata, Munata seems the same thing, so let's just say this and that. And then eventually we get the version of the Natlan lore we have today prior to the actual release of Natlan. And all of these things contributed to having questions like this, where we think that things have been retconned in ways that they probably weren't. However, I will also say that in general, I'm also just I don't put a lot of stock in the manga itself. If you didn't know, the manga actually was never fully translated into English. It only goes up to chapter 13, right? These two blanks were never filled. It has been a very long time. And it just never happened. If you only read the English version, you would think that chapter 13 was the last chapter. But if you go to traditional Chinese, it actually goes to chapter 14, which is incredibly strange because in simplified Chinese, it goes to chapter 16. So what's going on here? Well, it means that they never even took the effort to translate simplified Chinese into traditional Chinese, which is, if you are familiar with Chinese, is as simple as just like clicking a button. There is no grammatical differences. There are no pronunciation differences. It's literally just a simple change of how the word is written. It's almost something like a stylistic difference. So the fact that they never even took the effort to translate the manga from simplified Chinese to traditional Chinese, and then they never took the effort to translate the traditional Chinese chapter 14 to English chapter 14, tells me that maybe Hoyoverse would just like to forget that the manga existed in the first place. And yeah, it's unfortunate, but that is what it is. I'm not saying that the manga is completely invalidated. I'm just saying that it's been a long time, right? It's been over 5 years since this manga was written and drawn. And a lot of things happened in between then. A lot of things probably happened in between the Traveler's Travail trailer versus what we have now. Things probably were rewritten. They must certainly have. It's not like they wrote the entire story back when they first released the trailer or wrote the manga, right? So just use common sense about what you know. Well, actually, that's probably not a good idea because a lot of people probably have never written stories or anything of that kind in their lives. But just understand that writing is difficult, and writing stories your interests change, the way you write change, and what you want to write changes as well over the course of time. What you know works also changes, and maybe they decided that this lore just didn't work with the current state of Genshin lore. And that's perfectly fine. Like, Genshin Impact is so big now that there is no way that every single piece of lore, I know this is going to break your minds, there is no way that every single piece of lore, every single bit of knowledge you know about Genshin Impact all just comes together neatly. There are probably different pieces of Genshin lore that were written by different people, and they all have to come to the fact that they are expected to come all together. The fact that Genshin Impact lore is so consistent at this point is actually kind of a miracle. I'm actually kind of surprised that it is the way it is, because, you know, if you follow any kind of other large fandom or any large franchise outside of Genshin, like Star Wars, they've reset that shit over so many times. It's crazy. So I hope that doesn't happen to Genshin Impact. And, you know, our canon, hopefully, oh my god, fuck this alarm. Okay, I've basically said what I wanted to say. Just use common sense when it comes to what is possible in terms of such a large franchise, such a large game with all these different thousands of pieces of lore. It's hard, guys. You gotta actually do it before you understand how difficult it is. This is Benchgamer signing out, and hopefully you guys are a bit more understanding about how the game of telephone kind of just fucks things up. And then you also have to understand that, you know, it's been a long time and all that shit. This is Benchgamer signing out, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.